We're now live.
Thank you for that. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's now 9 o'clock, and so I resume the further hearings of this examination of the North Hertfordshire local plan. As you will know, my name is Simon Barclay. I'm a planning inspector and a chartered town planner, and I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this examination into the soundness of the plan. So everyone should have read my two guidance notes. The first that is about the examination in general, and the second guidance note, which is my special guidance note about the use of Zoom. As previously, then the main point, I think, or the main few points to bear in mind, please, if you can join with cameras on, unless you don't wish to be seen on the screen. I prefer to have cameras on so that I can see who I'm talking to in front of me rather than talking at a blank screen all day. And if you can join as well, but generally have your microphone switched off, but put it on when you are making your contribution, obviously, so that we can actually hear what you're saying. And as well, if you want to get into the discussion at a particular point, if you could raise your virtual hand rather than your real one, I'd be grateful. And that's using the raise hand facility on Zoom, which hopefully everyone should know where to find that. Yeah, matter 26 then. Villages for growth. I'm going to, quite unusually, spend a little bit of time just talking to you about this before handing over. So I'm going to take the time to actually read what I've put on my matters and issues paper. So main modification MM10 amends the settlement hierarchy, or proposes to amend the settlement hierarchy in policy SP2. It removes 5 villages, those being Barkway, Codicott, Nicholford, Nebworth and Little Wymondley, from the villages for growth, and along with the towns, assigns housing figures to each. This modification was advanced by the council at my suggestion, and I suggested it for 2 primary reasons. The first, for effectiveness, to make sure that the local plan's strategic policies provide a clear indication of the distribution of development that's proposed in the plan. And the second reason being to ensure that the hierarchy is justified. As originally drafted, the category A villages tier of the hierarchy included villages with significantly different levels of new housing development. So by that I mean that the levels of housing development proposed at the villages within that band didn't seem to me to be particularly comparable or similar. So in suggesting the modification, it was never my intention that the actual distribution of development between the villages concerned should be changed. Neither was it my intention that the local plan should permit a greater level of growth than that originally proposed. Rather, my concern related to the soundness of the way in which policy SP2 illustrated the housing already proposed through the local plan. The Council's response to my letter of the 9th of August last year confirms that these changes simply reflect in a clearer way what the local plan as submitted already proposes, and does not confer any sort of new status on the 5 villages. It also confirms that the modification does not result in a more or less permissive approach to windfall development, and does not allow for further growth of the 5 villages than if they were identified under the category A villages tier. That is in line with both my intention for and my reading of the main modification. So this goes really to what is the point of policy SP2. And it seems to me that the point of policy SP2 is to indicate the distribution of development that's proposed in the plan, like a way marker or a sign spelling out the direction of the plan, the direction that the plan's taking in relation to housing growth. and to describe the role of each settlement in that growth by way of a hierarchy. So in effect, it should describe what the plan does. As I've just sort of said, as submitted, it wasn't, in my view, sound, because it didn't properly describe the approach taken through the plan, and that is through the housing allocations. And as I said, it included within one category different settlements where the plan proposes significantly different levels of growth, and that is the issue that I took in relation to that policy. The main modification put forward by the council, that's MM10, is to rectify that one specific problem, and that being a problem of inconsistency, as I see it, within the plan itself. So that's what we're talking about today, whether MM10 now accurately reflects the housing growth proposed through the plan, through the site allocations, that is, by and large. What we're not talking about, the two main things that we're not talking about, whether the level of growth proposed for any individual settlement is sound. We've talked about that already at great length through the hearing sessions on matters 2 and through matter 2 and indeed on matter 5. And we're also not talking about site-specific issues or specific proposed allocations. We've already talked about every single site proposed through the plan at a hearing session already, and I'm not going back on that. So now, some of the statements that I have in this matter do encroach onto those 2 points, those 2 things that I'm specifically not going to talk about today. Now, I have read those statements, but what I can't and won't do, though, is entertain any discussion today on them during the hearing session. So please don't try and get in points about level of growth proposed at any particular settlement or anything that's any site-specific issue. Please don't try and get points about those things today through the back door, as it were, and have a second bite of the cherry. We've already, as I say, discussed those things at great length, and that's not something that I'm going to do today. Please don't try. I don't want to have to cut anyone off. It's quite unseemly, and I really don't want to have to do that, but I will if contributions go in that direction. So as I've said in my matters and issues, it's going to be necessary for anyone objecting to this main modification to clearly demonstrate, and this is question A, why this modification, or why MM10 and the modifications contained within it are not necessary for soundness. So who is here to tell me that it's not necessary for soundness? Mr. Watts had the quickest trigger finger.
Before I make any comments, sir, my comment is related in part to the conflict, as I see it, between policy SP2 as drafted and policy CD1, which is specific to land south of Cowards Lane allocation. I'm conscious of what you just said, sir. I don't want to talk about the site, but the point I wanted to make was that I see the wording of policy SP2 as being in direct conflict with the policy in CD1. And I'm also concerned that in terms of soundness, by creating a new tier of villages within the settlement hierarchy as villages for growth, it in a sense removes it from the concept of sustainability, which is a key objective at national and local level, both of the new local plan and the MPPF, the framework. So I'm concerned about that. They're the 2 points on soundness I'd make, sir.
Okay. When you say that you'll make, are you about to go on to say more about them, or?
I don't. I'm very conscious. I don't want to touch on site-specific issues, but policy CD1 is specifically drafted in a way which, in a sense, doesn't. How can I put it? Go along with the aims and objectives of the revised policy SP2, because it's very much focusing on the phasing of developments and the difficulty in achieving growth because of the infrastructure capacity issues.
Okay, well, what we can do is know that we have policy CD1 drafted as it is.
Yes.
Given the drafting that we have in policy CD1, what is wrong about policy SP2 as proposed to be amended?
Because in my view, it's open-ended, sir. It doesn't restrict growth to a certain phase of the plan. It doesn't indicate that there are problems in terms of achieving the levels of growth the council are trying to achieve on specific site allocations in Codicot.
Sorry, bear with me.
Sorry.
So yeah, forgive me, I don't quite follow. It doesn't restrict growth to certain phases of the plan.
No, well, my view is it should, sir. But it's not just the issue for CD1; it's for other sites in Codicot.
Yeah,
That's where I find it difficult to separate out views about site-specific issues from this policy, sir.
Well, that's fine. So I think the point that you're making is in relation to SP2, is that it ought to include some indication about phasing.
Yes, sir. Quite clearly, and what that phasing is related to. In other words, the achievement of specific infrastructure. And it seems to me, sir, in terms of sustainability, that's linked to this. And it seems that as part of the development of policy SP2, there should have been a much stronger linkage to infrastructure plans for each of these villages, if actually designating them as villages for growth made any sense. The council should be embarking on an infrastructure planning process, or form of master planning, in my view, for each of these villages, which should form a focal part of this local plan, and it hasn't been done up to now.
Okay, so just to help me out there, what do you have in your mind's eye for SP2? If you were to take policy SP2 and change it so that it did accurately reflect what the plan proposes, what would that look like?
I think there should be another paragraph, sir, requiring that for each of these villages for growth, assuming you keep the policy in place, there should, upon adoption of the local plan, be an immediate commencement of a process to develop master plans and associated infrastructure plans for each of these villages, with phasing a key component of that. There are a number of consultancies who could produce that for the council, I would say, quite reasonably and quickly. Not mine, I hasten to add.
I see. Okay, so requiring the production of some sort of overarching settlement-specific plan that sort of illustrates the housing growth in that particular
and how it's going to be delivered and phased upon the completion of pieces of infrastructure that are critical to the good health and sustainability of that settlement, sir.
Okay, I understand.
That's it. Okay, thank you.
You see, I need we can manage it without talking about specific settlements.
I'll do my best, sir, as you know.
Your endeavours in that respect, Mr. Watts.
Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins.
Good morning, Inspector. I would suggest, following on from Mr. Watts's contribution just made, that neighbourhood plans would obviously be a relevant document to refer to because they are drawn up by local people. They do relate to the locality that those people live in. We realise that everyone involved in this local plan feels like they are carrying out their civic duties to deliver homes in accordance with the government's mantra to build, build, build. But it is a fact that there is 1 million empty dwellings and enough brownfield sites in the UK to build 1 million more, whereas the need to build on greenfield sites at all. We believe it's helpful to start with the policy that has served North Herts well for many, many years and has made this area an attractive place to live. And I refer to policy 5, excluded villages, as it was in the previous plan. Within the excluded villages of Codica, Ickleford, Kimpton, Nebworth and Little Wymondley, the council will normally permit development for housing, employment, service and community facilities only if the development proposed is compatible with the maintenance and enhancement of village character and the maintenance of greenbelt boundaries as shown on the proposals map. And that goes to the very heart of what a neighbourhood plan is supposed to be delivering. And, you know, as one of the first villages in North Hertfordshire to achieve a neighbourhood plan status, you know, it specifically relates to one particular village, obviously in Wymondley. And we believe that it's important to recognise what went before to consider what is to come. And many of the residents of the growth villages would have recognised the protection conferred by this statement and considered setting up home and raising their families in these areas as a result of this policy and the way in which it supported category A and the excluded villages. It's noted that the term growth villages was a phrase suggested by you, Inspector, in one of your first sessions on the Greenbelt. And I must say,
I'm not sure that I did, but in any event, go on.
Well, I think you're on record for saying so. So
yeah. I mean, you know, the recording would reveal that one way or the other. You're quite right.
I was sitting in the audience at the time, and I can say that my group were aghast at your attempt to assist the NHDC with constructing their plan. Whilst we appreciate it was merely an expression, a definition, it appears to have developed into an excuse for the continued expansion of proposed development areas within the Greenbelt and the specific category A villages to which early reference was made have been added to as more sites have become available. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. If I could, forgive me for interrupting, because I don't want to lose the point. You see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean. Yeah, I know that the term growth villages is one that's been used, irrespective of, you know, who first coined it, whatever. It frankly matters not, because I think in terms of the intention here, they might just as well have been called, you know, category A, category B, category C, whatever.
I've lost you, Inspector. I think you're breaking up.
I do actually wonder whether that's something.
Sorry.
Sorry, did I?
Yeah, you broke up. Right, I can hear you now.
Right. Can I just check? Can everyone hear me? Hear me well enough? Okay. Yeah, I had a notice on my screen saying that the internet connection was poor or something like that. What was I saying?
I think you were explaining that they could be called different names, regardless of.
Yeah, and I do wonder if the particular terminology that's been used is something that's, how shall I say, stirred emotions, when that was not the intention of the recategorization at all, because as I said in my sort of opening mini speech, it wasn't my intention that recategorization should lead to any more or indeed any less housing growth at any particular settlement. So hopefully at least that's understood.
I understand it. I just would say that at the time it arose, it did create more of an adversarial air than it needed to, and it has rolled on since that moment. But anyway, for the purpose of this conversation, we know what those villages are and how they relate to their relevance within the local plan. So we'll move on if you don't mind.
If I could again, because you mentioned neighbourhood plans.
Yes.
And again, a similar sort of question that I put, I suppose, to Mr. Watts. So if you can give me an insight into your mind's eye in terms of what policy SP2, in your view, should say, and particularly in relation to neighbourhood plans.
Well, yes, sir. I mean, basically, in relation to neighbourhood plans, you know, as somebody who sat with 10 other local people on evenings when we could be doing much better things, we decided that because we love our local area, that we thought it was necessary for us to sit and provide some thoughts about it. And we grasped a lot of information from what was available from the county council, from the local authority. And we structured our neighbourhood plan on the belief that that was what the authorities ultimately wanted, only to find that it stepped up 3 years and was moving away from the village that was, you know, where we felt we were living, and to the sort of mini town that the local authority felt that they wanted to create. And I think that's what Chris Watts is suggesting in terms of the way that, you know, things have a habit of growing over a period of time. Not in the case, and I don't mention this site specifically only just to give you an example, but in the case of Wymondley, Inspector, we are a village of 350, 380 homes, and there are plans to put another 300, possibly 350 homes into this village. So, you know, it's a huge change for people to get used to. So the neighbourhood plan was structured around the policies I mentioned at the Little Wymondley Day, the policies regarding the landscape and all those sorts of things. And, you know, they're a government structure. They are in law recognised as devices to support and supply information for planning judgment. And they ought to be taken into account when it comes to making broad plans for the district, and that would be the situation. I mean, we are living in a county which is responsible for creating the first and second garden cities in the world and the very first new town. And we are therefore quite used to the concept that towns and cities expand and are developed rather than what appears to be sporadic developments appearing because landowners in the Greenbelt want to offer their sites for development and the local authorities keen to make the best return from their hitherto protected Greenbelt land to see a sizable return from the new homes bonus to support their currently stressed finances. As a result, the suggestion makes the plan unsound because it has derived the relevance that I'm sure you didn't intend. It proposes development where growth should exist. It appeared as though we were signposting this development to take place, and it relates to paragraph 86 of the NPPF, and we insist that in the growth villages, openness is a clear factor. As you know, Inspector, we are violently opposed to seeing 85% of the proposed new developments end up in the current Greenbelt. And this factor has greatly assisted us in raising sufficient funds for the legal support at 2 EIP sessions and any likely assistance needed post your decision. We have said that we truly want to see the NHDC have a plan for homes, but it needs to be just that, a plan. And this would be why we have questioned their failure to consider a new settlement where Osborne, planned way back in 1911, would have successfully joined its sisters in Letchworth, Welling and Stevenage. Being adverse to the development within the villages is clear for the following reasons. The 4 villages in the Greenbelt, Nebworth, Codicat, Ickleford and Wymondley, are all close to major conurbations, and the Greenbelt around them is to protect these settlements from coalescence.
You have to forgive me, Mr. Hawkins. Are you going on to tell me why there shouldn't be so much development in certain settlements? Because that's among the things we're not talking about today.
Okay.
Because I'm not interested, but because I've heard all of those points. Frankly, I've heard those points quite a lot. So that they are not lost on me. Fear not. But if you are going there, please don't.
Understood. Thank you very much. I would like to have a further conversation later, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Just before I move on, Mr. Watts is indicating again. So the main modification that the council's put forward for SP2 does at the very the last paragraph in the policy does refer to neighbourhood plans. It says development outside of these locations or general parameters will be permitted where this is supported by an adopted neighbourhood plan. Under the provisions of national policy at the time of this plan's examination, neighbourhood plans cannot allocate sites in the green belt or amend green belt boundaries. I just wonder whether you thought that could or should be taken further in some way.
Well, certainly when we were considering our neighbourhood plan for our area, we were in full recognition of the fact that we couldn't consider developments within the green belt because we were excluded from doing so. So our neighbourhood plan relates to the village boundary that already exists. And in fact, in that particular neighbourhood plan, we were able to persuade our residents to accept up to 50 homes being delivered within a 350 home environment. And I think that was quite a big step to achieve, only to find that the local plan wanted to impose something like 300 to 350. But, you know, I am genuinely of the belief, and I think the government is that, you know, local plans should be about the involvement of local people. And apart from the opportunity for our neighbourhood plan to be assessed by an inspector, there has been no conversation with North Herts District Council about any of their proposed developments. You know, none of us want to stand in the way of the homes being developed in the right places where sustainability and urbanisation lend themselves. But there are some real issues with the areas that relate to the growth villages. And, you know, if you could find it within yourself to exclude the growth villages, Inspector, you know that we would be delighted with that decision.
At that point, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Watts.
Yes, a point of clarification, sir. Whilst I'm fully supportive of the aims of neighbourhood planning, this is really a strategic issue for the whole district. You have 5 villages, which has a potential label of being a village for growth. And I believe that the district should take responsibility, manage and coordinate the master planning based on good infrastructure planning themselves. I don't believe that an individual neighbourhood plan have got the resources or the abilities to do that at a strategic level. So my suggestion that the policy be expanded is for the benefit of the district council, so they take charge, they take responsibility for their own plan and demonstrate how they're going to deliver the key pieces of infrastructure for each of these villages through a master planned approach. And there are consultancies out there who could do that for them and do it on a consistent basis. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, so in effect, Mr. Watts, I think what you were saying is that there isn't really anything between you and Mr. Hawkins apart from the way in which you would achieve the same thing, more or less. Is that about right?
Yes, sir. I believe in consistency, and I think the district council needs to apply a consistent approach to the way in which these 5 villages are developed and planned for, and that can only be done by a consistent approach to the delivery of infrastructure. Now, traditionally, that's been done through Section 106 agreements, more recently through community infrastructure levy arrangements. But of course, they're all delivered on the basis of an individual development. And when the first spade is put into the ground, normally, that's when the funding is released by the developer. But this, I believe, requires much more urgent and quicker master planning so that we all know where we're going in terms of the delivery of key infrastructure, or if that can't be provided, that the growth that's indicated in those allocations has to be put back to a later phase in the plan. Hence my suggestion that in our representations, that master planning is a key component, but also a sequential approach to phasing of developments, depending on key infrastructure coming on board. We have the example in Codicot of the expansion of the school. That could take another 2-3 years to bring forward. But what happens if one site in Codicot gets permission after the adoption of the local plan and starts to be developed before that school expansion has been completed or even starts? So these things do need good coordination, and it needs to be through policy SP2, which needs to be expanded, I believe so.
Okay, I understand the point, Mr. Watts. Thank you. Ms. Cotier.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking now at the neighbourhood the policy that relates to neighbourhood planning in the plan, and it says that the council will support it. It's 1.10 and 1.11, and just to pick up on the point that Adrian made, that they really encourage neighbourhood planning, and they've said that they will support.
Forgive me, Miss Cotier. Forgive me. I couldn't hear you then.
Oh God! How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Try again. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, so I'm picking up on the point that Adrian made about neighbourhood planning, and effectively that they have a neighbourhood plan in place, but it's been sort of ignored. So the plan, the policies in the local plan 1.10 and 1.11 I'm looking at right now, they say that obviously it's supported under the Localism Act, but they go on to say that provided that the plan meets certain core requirements, the council will support it. And there's absolutely no reason why that the neighbourhood plan in this case that's completed has breached any of those conditions. It has to have appropriate regard to national policy and guidance. It has to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development, which it has. It has to be in general conformity with the strategic policies contained in the development plan for the area, which they obviously think it does, and not breach and be otherwise compatible with EU obligations. So it's quite alarming that if a community has gone to the effort to produce, and it's quite a lengthy process, but they've actually gone to the trouble to produce a neighbourhood plan. And the idea behind the Localism Act is that people who actually live in the area get to have more of a say as to how their area develops and evolves, which makes perfect sense, rather than have a pyramidical hierarchy where somebody from above looms over you and says, right, now we're going to stick 1,000 houses on top of you. Sorry about that, but deal with it. It's not really the right attitude, and doesn't really encourage people to want to go ahead and develop a neighbourhood plan for themselves. And they are obliged to not ignore neighbourhood plans. So there are other areas that have set them in motion as well. And I think maybe one or two of those have encountered the same problems about not having been listened to.
Thank you, Ms. Cotier. Okay, Mr. Hawkins. Sorry, you're on mute, Mr. Hawkins.
Two buttons I have to press, not just the one. Okay, just coming back to you about modification MM010, which you're referring to, Inspector. The modification excludes the growth villages, as I understand it, reading it now on the schedule of proposed main modifications. And it also goes on to say development outside of these locations or general parameters will be permitted where this is supported by an adopted neighbourhood plan. And I just can't understand that. Isn't that slightly ambiguous?
Sorry, am I looking at the final paragraph in SP2 as proposed to be amended by the council?
Yes. Development outside of these locations or general parameters will be permitted where this is supported by an adopted neighbourhood plan. So are we saying in SP2 that developments outside of the existing neighbourhood plan area, for want of a better word, or the village boundary, would be supported when it's supported by an adopted neighbourhood plan? Am I understanding that right?
I don't think so. I think that what it might mean, for example, is that right. Well, just for example, that the policy says in Category A villages, general development will be allowed within the defined settlement boundaries. Yeah.
Yep.
I think what that means is if, and again, this is just one example, if there were a proposal to develop outside of the settlement boundaries of such a settlement, then it would be permitted only where it was supported, if that was supported in an adopted neighbourhood plan. Is that a fair reflection, Mr. Smith?
Yes, it is. That's correct.
So, as an example of Little Wymondley, the village boundary.
Well, I don't think we need to give the village a name, Mr. Hawkins.
Okay. Well, I can only do it because that's the one I'm closely associated with, having created a neighbourhood plan within. But anyway, the boundary exists, and therefore this development currently isn't supported by a neighbourhood plan. That's the point I'm trying to make. So we may stumble in.
Well, forgive me, I didn't quite follow that. I'm very sorry.
All right. Well, the village boundary, as it was set for the current neighbourhood plan, is the village boundary that predates this local plan inquiry examination in public.
Yeah, I see.
Your decision would extend the village boundary, and that sentence doesn't permit that development to go ahead because the neighbourhood plan at this point in time doesn't permit that development. Do you get my drift?
I thought I did, but I'm not so sure again now. Yeah, I mean, clearly, this part of the policy, like all of the policies, won't actually apply until such a point when it's adopted. So it refers to, so for example, the reference to the defined settlement boundaries is a reference to the defined settlement boundaries as currently proposed through this plan. So you have to kind of cast your mind ahead to a point at which this is an adopted plan.
Right. Okay. I didn't realise it was speaking about things that were going to happen, even though you haven't made the decision yet. Well, anyway, I'll leave it to you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Aspinall.
Well, Mr. Berkeley, I get more frustrated as I listen to the debate about this local plan. And now we're having this debate about growth villages. The question I've got to ask is, why is there a need to have growth villages? Because, of course, in my view, the whole process of building in North Hertfordshire is a necessity. Now, I just want to line up the fact that, is the council saying that these growth villages can have more houses and extend into the green belt? Or, I'm not sure about these villages. I don't think that they are on land beyond the green belt. I think they're all within the terms of green belt. So the council haven't looked at the villages that have gone beyond the green belt. Now, are they saying, Mr. Barclay, that the other villages that are in category A, by definition, are not intended for growth? Because that is an element of discriminatory policy between the two.
Yeah, just to help out, hopefully. Okay, I'll stick with the term we've got. So we have the term here, growth villages, and then 5 villages identified as growth villages in this policy, as proposed to be changed by the council. Yeah. So the point of setting that out in policy SP2 is to give a strategic policy that describes, indicates what the plan as a whole is actually doing in terms of the proposed housing, particularly in terms of the proposed housing allocations. So by using the term growth villages, I do wish we'd come up with something else rather than getting stuck on words. But in using the term growth villages, what it's saying is no more than this is what is proposed in this plan, and then the following policies, the ones that allocate the housing sites and all the rest of it, that is sort of delivering that what that's saying, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I understand. I understand what you're saying.
So what
point is,
forgive me, just to help, what it's not saying is that it might be better to look at it in terms of what it's not saying. What it's not saying is that any more growth is expected or even supported necessarily in any of these villages other than the numbers that have been set out in the policy by and large. Is that, Mr. Smith, a fair reflection? I'm not sure if I explained it that well, but hopefully I got there in the end.
Yes, it is. Can I pick up on a point of slight semantics? The phrase sort of growth villages, capital G, capital V, doesn't appear anywhere in the plan. It is sort of, I appreciate it, it stirs emotion, but it is stated as in the policy, housing will be delivered in 5 villages identified by this plan for growth, which is a statement of fact, and similarly in the supporting text, 5 villages have been identified that can support higher levels of growth. So we're perhaps getting a little hung up on growth villages, but it's not.
Spot I had picked up on. That's why I put. No, that's why I put it in inverted commas in my matters and issues. Yes. But we have all fallen into using the term growth villages, haven't we? As a shorthand, I suppose, which isn't particularly helpful. Because as I said at the outset, Mr. Aspin, I don't know if you were here when I opened the hearing session this morning, but I explained really about what the point of policy SP2 is, and that is, in short, to describe what the rest of the plan does. And if it doesn't do that properly, then policy SP2 isn't sound. And that's what I'm talking about today, looking at whether or not policy SP2 does or does not adequately describe what the rest of the plan is setting out to do. It's not intended to change anything else, and it doesn't, frankly, change anything else in the plan itself in terms of housing allocations or where housing is or isn't allowed.
Well, I take your point, but the wording and the actual interpretation of the meaning may be 2 different aspects when it comes down to planning applications that might apply throughout the whole district. What we seem to be having here is a debate which is twisting round the whole process. I feel that the category A villages should be sacrament to the whole basis of those type of villages, whether they be adjoining the green belt or adjoining the land beyond the green belt. They should have the opportunity of growth, not just discriminating between 5 villages. And if you think this beyond that, one of my main themes throughout the whole debate of the local plan is quality of life. And that means that villages that have no growth will not be able to get money from the Section 106, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I think myself that this is a fiddle to put in words. And I'd like to put in another fiddle that could be expressed, has been expressed a number of times. And that is that, sorry, my voice is has been expressed a number of times. And that is that land adjoining villages, land adjoining towns could be considered for development. That then means that there could be growth in those places where people support it. And that could be supported in a number of ways. Either somebody wants to build there, or indeed there's no objection to the people who live there to want to build in that particular area. We have these words restrict and restraint that comes into this local plan a number of times. I can well see that what's going to happen is that those words will be used against any planning application. So I don't agree with the setting out of these 5 villages. I think that the opportunity should be there for towns and villages, particularly the category A villages, to have the opportunity to grow if they wish, but only if they wish. And that comes about through a planning application, and it has to go through the rigors of all the investigation that takes place, including those that are for and those that are against. This is not sustainable, as has been expressed earlier on. And the other thing is, you have to look at those other 2 words that go along with sustainable, and that is availability and also achievability. And Mr. Barclay, during 2020, North Herts District Council could have done a land assessment while they've been waiting for this hearing to take place, and they've not done it, and they won't answer the question.
Okay.
I've finished.
Thank you, Mr. Aspinall. Ms. Hutchinson.
Good morning, sir. Can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you. Yes, I think it seems to be that the controversy really is about the words for growth. And I'm looking at this plan as it should be, which is to be the plan for development up to 2031. So people will not be looking at, well, what was it intended to do? What were the original intentions? They will simply look at what is the wording. And the wording quite clearly says it's for growth. It's put it's taken 5 villages out of category A and put them in their own hierarchy. So even as a hierarchy, they're already put above category A villages. And it's quite specific that they are for growth. We're already seeing that with the applications that are coming in, that we are not looking at villages that are taking that level of growth anticipated by the plan. We're looking at growth beyond that. So it's already happening. In 5 years' time, I don't have a crystal ball as to what the government policy on green belts or anything else will be, but the plan will still be there, and it will still say to developers, to land promoters, to the residents, this is a village, well, these are the villages where growth is anticipated. So it does set a totally different status to those villages, and one which is not being met by the infrastructure and facilities that is actually being provided, as far as I can see, with the policies. So, and I don't wish to harp on about Codicut and the education facilities, but it is already happening that if you expand a facility like a school, which has no other site to expand, then you will be in the same situation that it is already happening. So that is just one thing. But you know, we have to look at this as a plan for the future and how it will be interpreted. And I can guarantee that that will be the way it will be interpreted by developers. I'm already dealing with, for a local authority, defending policies very similar to this, where you have a hierarchy of villages where growth was anticipated in the local plan. It's all taken place, and developers and land promoters are saying, but it's still identified for growth. That is the main concern. And it may be then that we have to, you know, removing the words for growth and making it very specific that this policy simply relates to those figures. And this policy doesn't do that at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Yes, Mr. Smith, do you think that some, I'm not sure this is the right phrase really, but some rebadging or some rewording here would be of assistance in terms of the plan's effectiveness?
If it would help resolve these issues, then yes, obviously you could call these 5 now category A and reband everything else B, C, D. We've called them growth because, as a matter of fact, that's what's happening in all these villages. You know, there are 200 or more homes proposed within each boundary. I call that growth. I'm not sure what other word you might use for it, but you know, if there is a softer form of words that people would be happier with, then I think the council is happy to consider it.
Well, you know, in my job, I've seen, you know, hierarchies expressed in all sorts of different ways, and in some you have, you know, city, mid-city, town, largest villages, medium-sized villages, whatever. Is that the sort of thing that that you have in mind?
Yeah, we'll come up with an appropriate phrase. I'm sure we can find one in.
Yeah, I mean, so perhaps I can come in here. I mean, it seems to me obviously that the main objections are the fact that these villages have got development proposed in them. That's the main objection, although it might be sort of described in slightly different ways. But I mean, you could just simply say approximately 11% of housing along with supporting infrastructure and facilities will be delivered in the following 5 villages as set out. And just, you know, but I mean, it is semantic. The objections are in relation to the level of development in the villages, not whether it's growth, development, or how it's described.
Well, that's right. But it's clear to me that you're right. It is a semantic point. But language and terminology can be important. It's clearly important to people participating in these hearing sessions, and it seems to me that a different form of wording which does the same thing might be more palatable to all.
Well, I'm not sure it would be, sir. I mean, the complaint is that growth is proposed in these villages. I'm aware. Not that that's what the policy, you know, not the use of the word growth. That's the complaint, is that they don't like the level of development.
Well, I'm aware that people don't like the level of development. As I've said to others, and as you'll recall, we've discussed that at great.
Yeah, and we're discussing it again now.
Well, I'm trying very hard not to.
Well, I mean, it's inevitable, sir.
Yeah. And I am going to hold the line as far as I can on that point. I think the terminology used has had an unintended and perhaps unfortunate effect as well.
Well, I just disagree, but so obviously it's a matter for you. I mean, you know, we can come up with some different words which do the same thing if you think that's effective and necessary.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be. Ms. Cotier.
Thank you. I wanted to give, I wasn't going to sit in on this particular hearing session initially, but then I felt I had some real life examples to offer the people here that would be useful to and relevant to the points that I think Mr. Aspinall's making and Chris Watts is also making, as well as Alison and Adrian. So I think the idea behind what Mr. Aspinall is saying is that he thinks that growth needs to be more widely spread, and that if somebody outside of the growth villages wants to participate in building moderate quantities, they would be possibly excluded by the wording, because it's sort of indicating that the growth would happen only in the villages but not in other places. And at a glance from initially when I first heard Mr. Aspinall speak early on in the last set of in the hearings back in 2017, you're scanning the room, picking out people that are your allies and people that are not. I thought, I wasn't quite sure where Mr. Aspinall was, because I thought, oh, on the one hand, he wants to build, which I'm probably not in that category exactly. But then when I got to listen to what he was saying, I understood, actually, yeah, because if they build in smaller quantities more broadly, that means that it wouldn't be overly concentrated in only certain areas, and that actually is a more balanced approach. So I wanted to give an example, such as it is Cockenhoe, but that's not because I'm it could be another village just as easily, but in this case it's Cockenhoe, but remove the name, it really doesn't matter. In 2009, which is outside of the plan period, they received planning permission to build 24 dwellings outside on the edge of the village, and nobody minded. It literally, I mean, it was actually a 10% uplift in the village size, but nobody minded. It got absorbed into the village, it enriched the village. I think it brought in some section 106, well, I don't know if it was section 106 money, but brought in some money that they were able to revamp the village hall. They didn't rebuild it, but it's a bit tin looking, but it was used, the money, and the village looks, admittedly, you look out across the horizon and you can see all these houses now, as before it was just trees, but it doesn't encroach too much. It was a balanced quantity, and then it got absorbed into the village. There was no resentment, there was no obstruction, and everybody was happy. So I think what I'm getting from this is that some people are saying, yeah, let's restrict a lot of growth in just a few key areas, whereas other people are saying, yeah, let's have more growth, but let's spread it out more widely. That's what I think the point of maybe not saying just growth villages is. It's like saying villages that might be those, but it might also be some others too, because there are a lot of villages in the plan that are just, they would probably appreciate some of the development, but they're not getting the look in. Why not? It just seems to be, seems to be creating unnecessary obstacles. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say.
My apologies. Can I just ask people to bear with me? I've got sun shining on my screen from behind, which means I'm struggling to see people on my screen. So if you bear with me a moment. Okay, that's better. Mr. Watts.
Yes, sir. It's really just to help perhaps the council and yourself. It seems to me your suggestion that the council might like to come forward with an alternative way of describing these villages for growth by removing the word growth is an excellent one. I think the focus should be very much for these 5 villages, if that's going to remain a key component of a settlement hierarchy, on infrastructure, delivery and capacity. So I would very much like to see their amended description focus on that instead. And I'd be very happy to comment on the wording over the next few days if they produce something for participants here to comment on. And I also share Alison's view, Alison Hutchinson, that we're not just dealing with, for example, in villages of several hundred houses with a set figure. In Codicot, there are at least another 60 houses in total, which are proposed through planning applications to come forward beyond the level that this policy SP2 actually sets. So exponentially, there's going to be further increases in housing over the next 5 years. And it's quite critical that if these 5 villages are to be given a special designation, that the focus isn't so much on growth, but preparing the capacity to accommodate these sites, even if in principle we don't agree they should be, because they're all on greenbelt land. We have to accept that that's your dilemma, sir. Thank you.
Indeed, yes, thank you for reminding me about that, Mr. Watts. Ms. Hutchinson.
Yeah, it's a very short point, sir. It's simply, it's not semantics in this respect. We are dealing with a plan that's got to last for whatever length of time it's got to last for. And while the intentions may be there of what it's to be and how it should be interpreted, it's actually how it's going to be interpreted is my concern. Yes, I'm sure that the villages aren't happy with the amount of growth that is already being proposed. But what is also being told by this policy is that they can expect more. And the infrastructure is not planned within this local plan for additional growth. So there does need to be a rewording, I think, of this policy that makes, if it's going to be growth, then there has to be extra infrastructure, or take out the word growth and a revision of the policy itself. So I think that it does need quite a bit of a think about it, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Inspector. I guess we need to think about the overall involvement of the people. And at previous EIP hearings, I have read to you letters that I've received from the Minister of Housing, who makes it very clear that local plans are about the needs and the requirements and the support from local people. And whilst I appreciate that Miss Ormsby may be thinking that the Save Our Greenbelt are just a bunch of tree huggers, actually we are residents of North Hertfordshire. We are tax and rate payers, and we would like to have a voice. We'd like to be heard within the way that development takes place across the district. And quite honestly, when you have spent 5 years of your life unpaid, voluntarily sitting with other members of your community to create a neighbourhood plan, a device created by government to bring about the voice of local people, you would like it not to be taken away from you in terms of control, when in fact you sit at an EIP and the suggestion that your village is now going to become something that you've just wasted 5 years of your life trying to protect or create. So I do believe that the use of growth villages is an unnecessary statement. I do believe and agree with Mr. Aspinall that all villages should be allowed to expand in various shapes and forms. But when it comes to living in a village as against living in a town, I spent a long period of my life living in a town because it was very convenient for me to do so, with schools and shops and everything at hand. And it made a great environment for my young family to grow up. I chose to move to a village for a quieter way of life and to have some input to my community. And, you know, I think that some local government people have this belief that they make the decisions and we do as they're told. I would like there to be some understanding that the local plan process is about what the people actually would like to have happen. And rules like greenbelt protection exist because government wants there to be specific areas of safeguarding around major conurbations, etc., etc. So, you know, all we're asking is that those rules are not just thrown away. We're living in a time now of a pandemic when people are leaving major conurbations to come to areas like North Hertfordshire. The space is sought after, and we don't want to stop them from coming, but we want those people to arrive in spaces which have been properly planned for them. And putting 300 homes next to a village here or 500 homes next to a village there isn't necessarily the very best plan when it was based upon the availability of land, not the master plan of where we put the development. And whilst we argue that a new settlement was really necessary for North Hertfordshire, there is a railway line, there is a dual carriageway already serving that particular area. But it was ignored because the quick opportunity was there to place sites that were able to be developed because site owners were willing to get rid of those sites for the highest price paid. And all we're trying to do is to bring some structure to this process in a way that the people can live with it. And at no stage do we want there not to be a plan. We would just like there to be a plan that makes careful use of and understanding of people's feelings in the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in terms of the questions that I have set out, can I ask people to focus on those 5 questions, which hopefully you will have to hand. Mr. Aspinall. Which one of my 5 questions are you on? Sorry, 4 questions are you on?
Well, before I do that, I want to just say the neighbourhood development plan, it's not a neighbourhood plan, it's a neighbourhood development plan. It's got development in it. And therefore, under those circumstances, category A villages should be setting out what they consider to be right for development, not a neighbourhood plan that's set in the form that Mr. Smith and Mrs. Ormsby seem to be coming up with, a bureaucratic wording, which, as Mrs. Hutchinson has said quite clearly, the interpretation over the next 10 years is going to be disaster. Totally and absolutely disaster. Now, I just want to make a small advertisement. What you need to do, everybody, is have a look at the Home Builders Federation pamphlet that refers to the Section 106 issue. If you like, I can send it to you. But just as an example, somewhere in Oxfordshire, 43 houses were built, and those 43 houses generated a new community centre, which cost £400,000. Now, all these villages that are in category A need new infrastructure. That doesn't just mean pipes relating to sewage. It means infrastructure for the quality of life that the people living in those villages. And with modest development in those villages, then they're going to get that quality of life. So spread this out. Don't just make it in one specific area or a number of specific areas. Remember also, the Greenbelt is there, as has been said, to prevent urban spread. In other villages, there's no urban spread because it's land beyond the Greenbelt. So I'm going to ask this question of the council. Why is it that they're suddenly coming up now with the idea that certain villages, these 5 villages, are villages for growth? Is it because they think that they are near urban areas or within urban areas and aren't going to need the infrastructure development? Because let's face it, there's no money for infrastructure unless you build houses. And when you build houses, whether it be Section 106 or whether it be the new infrastructure levy that's coming about in the new year, the way that they're going to get that money to do that is by building and taking a levy off the building of each house. And that comes back to the whole theme that I look at this local plan is how for North Hertfordshire are we going to get quality of life for each individual resident now and in the future. And those that are living in the area now who don't want people to come and live in the area in the future are mistaken.
Thank you. Mr. Griffiths.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everybody. I couldn't get in either first thing, so it backfired right through my computer, and I've only just managed to get in at all. I'm gradually picking up on what you've had to say. A lot of this is all my fault because I was the author, I guess, of the village hierarchy and the rural settlement strategy. It was in this county structure plan. The policy that you now have before you, I guess, is derived from all that, which is focused on a hierarchy of settlements. And the settlements at the top of that hierarchy, which we now see as category A villages, are based partly, of course, on population and households, numbers of dwellings, but also on the range of facilities and services available in those villages. So obviously the idea of the village hierarchy was to focus development on the villages which have which had a range of services and facilities, like the village hall, the pub, the petrol filling station, and various other facilities that you might normally find in a thriving village. I did another study in 1990 which looked at the changes which had occurred in villages and in rural areas across the county over a period of 30 odd years, from the 60s through to the 90s. That was, I published that with the County Council in the year 2000. And it was very noticeable the way in which rural services and facilities had declined. And it was also noticeable the amount of residential development that was taking place in many of the villages. And so some of them have a greater residential element than others. And surprise, surprise, the villages with the greatest residential element were those in that Greenbelt area. And I'm representing here today Nebworth and Codicott and Wymondley parishes. And these are the three of the areas certainly that have seen increased residential development. I think it's no surprise to me that the council has come up with this main modification focusing on those villages. But I've picked up on the debate that we've had so far, and I am very concerned, obviously, about this word growth, because already in the debates that we've had over the last couple or 3 weeks, I've noticed that people have started to refer already to the growth villages.
Yeah, if it helps, Mr. Griffith, if I can just pause you there and
sure.
Because I think you probably, if you've only just joined us, you would have missed this. Yes, I have asked the council to relook at precisely how that part of policy SP2 is expressed.
Good. Well, I'm quite prepared. I think just picked up on what Mr. Watts was saying. I'm prepared to relook at that. Personally, I think they're fine as category A villages, and the amount of growth will really depend on, as I think we're starting to move towards, is infrastructure provision in those villages, and that needs to be better coordinated. And I do pick up on what we've heard just now about the role of neighbourhood plans. I've made this point before, and I think I'm very keen to develop the role of neighbourhood plans, which does, I think, develop a level of organic growth to villages, whatever position they may have in the category. Now I'll shut up there and
Okay, I'm going to start asking people now which of my questions they're answering first, which of my questions they're addressing, just so I'm clear about that. And that is what I want people to do, is to focus on the 4 questions that I've put on my matters and issues paper. Miss Cottier.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to attempt to talk about why separating out the villages for growth from the category A villages is not justified. I don't know if this relates exactly, but I found this Freedom of Information request that was put in back in, looks like 2020, earlier this year, 22nd of April, and Councillor Phil Jarvis, North Herts District Council, I think Lib Dem councillor, put it in. He said, "Dear North Hertfordshire District Council, I'm interested to understand why Carlton Village was not included in the settlement hierarchy assessment as presented in this NHDC statement for the hearing sessions of the examination of the local plan in November 2017. It provides a link to it. It says, I therefore request all written materials held by North Herts District Council pertaining to Carlton in relation to the above mentioned settlement hierarchy, which will explain its omission. Yours faithfully, Phil Jarvis." And that was sent by What Do They Know website, so anybody can access that. It's on a publicly displayed database. And the council they replied, but they said an exclusion applies, so they don't have to provide the information. In my experience, that's often what they try, and then you have to just go back and argue with them that the exclusion doesn't apply at all and that they should present the information, and then you usually get it. But it seems a bit silly that you have to jump through all those hoops just to get a basic request met. So that's happened to me so many times, it doesn't surprise me he got that response. But he should have persisted and gone back and pressed the matter, but he didn't, and we don't know, and we're none the wiser. So I know that's Carlton's, nothing to do with any of the villages we're talking about directly here, but at the same time it shows this sort of opaqueness about why some, why not others, and a lack of transparency. And the other thing that I did last night, I was actually up till 2 a.m. this morning doing this, grabbed 5 hours sleep, and then I'm back here again. But I was going back to inspectors' actions from 2017. And you mentioned at the start of this session today that matters 2 and 5 were already covered, and that we didn't need to revisit them. But what stood out to me when I went through all of your inspector action lists for weeks 1 to 8 is that the staggering number of homework that hasn't been completed by the council. And so, sad as I am, I decided to count everything up for every single week as to how many actions are not completed. And you've got your lists divided into grey coloured rows and white rows. And white is things like documents they have to present, and everything that's coloured grey are modifications that you suggested. So I broke those down, but overall, as a grand total, you made a request that the council complete 169 actions over those 8 weeks. And I counted them all up, and this is not discerning between the greys and the whites, it's just, total. They completed 37 of those 169, leaving 132 actions outstanding, if your records are up to date on the website, which I presume they are. So that's 132 things you requested that have not been done. Now, some of them were modifications, so they may have been added, but what I did notice, some of the grey modification points that you requested were given a date of completion. So I'm counting a total of greys that weren't done. 96 grey modification areas don't have a date attached to them. Now, that might be because nobody's actually updated it since, or it might be because they were never done, even though you suggested it. And what really bothers me, more than even the grey areas, perhaps, no, there's no reason why it should, but the white information, the actual documents that they were asked to produce, you asked a total of 64 things over those 8 weeks, and of them, 36 have not been presented. They have presented 28 of those 64, but 36 things were never completed. So, seeing as we supposedly have recovered, we're supposedly already done these matters, that certain elements of these matters way back, we've already addressed certain things were needed, and that would have been helpful. And actually, as I was going through looking more closely at the actual things that were missing, I found myself revisiting some of the things we were discussing the last 2 weeks, that if we'd have had them, it would have been really good, because we seem to be talking about the same things again. And one of the things that stood out in relation to this particular thing that we're talking about right now, it ties into what we've been saying about growth not being restricted to only certain growth villages and letting it be a bit more flexible and spread out in sites beyond. There was something that you requested, this was matter 4, so it wasn't 2 and 5, but it is relevant because it's about, it was under matter 4, the housing strategy, supply of land for housing. Not the same matter, but it is related, because you were asking for the council to provide paper justifying small windfall sites, including compelling evidence for the first 5 years. Consider evidence in relation to historic completions on small windfall sites, and specifically to extent to which those completions involve residential gardens. Provide view on definition of windfall sites and previously developed land, including reference to Dartford, BC in the Court of Appeal, and suggest any consequential amendments to small site windfall allowances. So if we were looking to ultimately spread development a bit further afield, having that would have been a really relevant document, and it also would have addressed some of the matters that we found ourselves arguing about for the last 2 weeks regarding, well, what about all this land that hasn't been included in the totals? There was also another one you asked them to do, which they didn't do. It was NHDC to provide paper justifying large site windfall allowances, including compelling evidence for the first 5 years. So you've asked for them to provide a 5-year land supply back in the very first week. Was it matter 4? That was, we did that on, very first week.
If I can, forgive me for interrupting there. Okay, I get the point. As far as I'm aware, I mean, I have to say I haven't looked at this for a while now, but as far as I'm aware, I thought that all of those actions were up to date.
No.
I will double check that.
So that is correct, sir. We've completed those actions, and specifically the windfall ones are in ED 140 in the long list of papers that we put in response to your actions.
Okay, so
that claim is just plain incorrect, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, can you correct your inspector's list of actions then to reflect that? Because that's what we're using as an index to follow up on the...
There's an index on the front of each of the homework sheets that we put in that signposts to where they're addressed. So the actions came out of the weeks of the hearings, they were posted at that time. And when we put the actions in, we've ticked them all off, and it's all quite clearly laid out.
So are we talking about the same document here? I'm talking about the inspector's action.
The thing that I'm talking about today is matter 26. What I want people to do is to focus on asking the questions that I've posed. So I'm not quite sure. I understand the point that you've made to me there, Ms. Cossier. What I'm not sure is which of my questions it relates to, or which of my 4 questions it was that you wanted to speak about.
Well, that was the one I said at the beginning, but then it went off into the thing that was less relevant than your original question. But I'm still not clear where I can find those, so that I can just not raise that again in another point. Where is Nigel saying the actions are shown to have been completed? Because there's so many. If there's 169, I can't go searching for every single thing that was requested in all the many documents. We've got over 200 now. That's supposed to be the list.
I understand the point, and yeah, you should be able to find all of that stuff on the examination web pages. If you're having trouble with that, or if something appears to be missing, you can't find it, whatever, that's I can understand that you would want to, but if you could take that up with the council outside of the hearing session, that's all. I don't want to use hearing time, because there are lots of people sat around here, and it's using up all of their time as well. So if you could take that up with the council outside of the hearing session.
Yeah, okay, I will. But I did sit up to 2 a.m. this morning going through the list, and I could have gone to bed at midnight if those lists would have been actually up to date. So effectively, I wasted 2 hours sitting there to 2 a.m. if those lists were actually all been, they've dated some things, but not others. So.
Okay. Well, like I say, if you could take that up with the council outside of the hearing session, because
that really wasted the time then. So.
Well, the thing is, you see, it's not helping me to understand what you think about in response to the 4 questions that I've set out, which is what I want to know. I want to know what people what answers to those questions.
I know that, but that kind of did tie into when I was trying to figure out what I was going to say to you in relation to these questions specifically. I started to sort of look around to find different things that I felt were relevant and that I could put in, because this wasn't actually always my main area of focus, so I was less knowledgeable about it. So that's what I was trying to do last night. And then when I thought to myself, hang on a minute, they're saying that all the development is clustering around certain areas only, we need to spread it out a bit more. How would we do that? But what are the obstacles? That led me into looking at the windfall sites. And then I thought, we talked about that a long time ago, went back to the inspector's actions, but was horrified when I saw how many things were missing. And I thought, right, okay, well, at least I've got those things. I can find them because they've given, the column has a date and a document number. So I could immediately go to ED, whatever it was, and find it. But when 137 items don't have references to anything within the later document library, it causes a problem. So that is not exactly related, but it's related to the process I would have to, as a participant, take in order to be able to answer your questions more precisely, because it's all about the indexing. You can have a lot of information at your fingertips, but if you haven't indexed it, you haven't got hope in hell of refinding it again once you've lost it. So that's what the purpose of an index, an information management index, is, and that is what that's supposed to serve.
Okay, what did you want to say to me on my questions this morning?
Oh God, that was pretty much it. I mean, I just agree with what Mr. Aspinall said about spreading it out a bit further afield, and that it can enrich the villages. So I think that maybe the idea of your original question was to sort of say that, okay, you've chosen these villages for growth, or can we put something, I don't know if I've understood this correctly, but can we put something in place that will make it at least not go beyond that? But I think what's happened is there's 2 sides to that coin. It could be taken to be growth won't go beyond that, but it could also be taken, which is what I think the point Miss Hutchinson said, was that it could be then used way into the future to say we can develop up to that, even though there might be other places that are also wishing to take some of that quota. We're going to stick it here, and we're going to keep it within that to the maximum amount we're allowed. So although it was meant to be a sort of maybe intended to be a balancer, it could actually end up having a counterproductive effect in restricting only things to those areas and not allowing some of the wider area to share some of that burden. I think that's what I kind of want to say. I'm sorry I haven't been that clear in this case, but I just, a disclaimer, this isn't my usual area. But I wanted to kind of support my friends, I suppose they've become friends over time, but you know, these people that have, like Adrian says, given up 5 years of their lives doing this, and you know, and at the same time, you know, we want to work together with the council, because they have until you know, they have only 2 more years left before the deadline. The government gave the deadline December 2023 as the date when all councils are supposed to have their local plans in place. Well, that gives us 2 years, okay, to address some of the holes in this. We don't need to panic and say, okay, we need to get moving. Yes, that's obvious, but we don't need to like rush and usher everybody through the door just to get, you know, something in, whatever it may be. I'm a great believer in doing things properly. If you're going to do something, do it well, or don't do it at all. Don't rush it just to try to get anything in place, and then we'll deal with the problems later. We have got enough time to be logical. We can all work together on this, and everybody wants to have a plan, because it doesn't serve anybody not to have one. But if the input that has been put forward is going to be rejected every step of the way, it's going to become a bit of a push-pull situation, which it doesn't have to be, because we just got to like give and take a little bit and be a bit more flexible. But I don't think that's necessarily the model that we're working with here. So that's why I think people have fears about the wording and how later it could be used against them. So I think the wording is, I mean, we've seen examples of the last 2 weeks of certain words being clung to, you know, I think the word enshrined was used a couple of times. It became more than just a word or a figure. It became an enshrined entity that was, you know, couldn't be moved, even if the real life evidence was pointing in a contrary direction. So that's why words and definitions, once they're put into a local plan, are such a touchy point, because, you know, they do tend to be brandished as a weapon if they end up getting in there permanently. So at this stage, I think that's what people are trying to make sure doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, I'm proceeding on the basis that I'll hear points from everyone in relation to my 4 questions. And if I can ask people again before they raise their hand to know which of the 4 questions it is that they're addressing. But that then once I've heard what people have to say in response to those 4 questions, I'd come back to you. I'd come to the council at the end, at the very end for the final word before I close the session. Are you all right with that? I'm just conscious again that we've heard quite a bit, and I want to check that everything's fine with you.
Yes, that's fine. Happy for you to continue your tour, and we'll see where we end up, and then we'll respond.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Watts, which of my 4 questions is it that you wanted to address?
So forgive me for interrupting. It is 10:30 now. I do wonder whether you were going to propose a mid-morning break. I think there's still quite a number of people who want to speak.
Well, I've got 3 hands up.
At the moment, yeah.
Pardon?
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Mine's a fairly quick point, sir.
I'm an optimist with Ormsby. I was okay, maybe not. We might deal with these points and then have a break so that Mr. Smith has a chance to think about what he's heard for his reply. I'll see how we go, but yeah, either way, I'll be taking a break pretty soon. Mr. Watt.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's fine. So everything went a bit fuzzy just then, but as long as you can hear me, sir. Yeah. The question I wanted to address was the 3rd one. Why include the level of new housing proposed in policy SP2 if it does it not assist its effectiveness. In my view, it doesn't assist its effectiveness as a policy. There are a number of reasons for that. Firstly, as Alison has explained in her piece to you, that certainly in Codicot, a number of developers are making planning applications which go well beyond that figure that's set out for that particular village. It also doesn't take account of the natural organic growth within Codicot and other towns and settlements in terms of use of previously developed and urban land. In the last, I think, 9 years, Codicot has accommodated nearly 100 new houses in various sightings. Now, that's not taken any account of in this figure. And it does concern me that this figure might be seen as a ceiling by the local community, whereas in fact, actually, the development industry might see it as a starting point. And those two don't sit comfortably together in the policy. And the final point I'd make is that there isn't a clear linkage between any of the figures and the level of infrastructure and the capacity of infrastructure needed to support it. And that's the point I made earlier, which I think needs to be made much clearer in the policy in its amended form. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. Mr. Aspinall.
I could comment on all the 4 questions if you wish, or I'll do them individually if you wish. But on point A, why they are not necessary for soundness. Well, they're not necessary for soundness because the category A villages that have been set out in the local plan already are a designation for an everlasting strategy. But there is no flexibility in its approach to building houses for the future. Category A villages can sustain building. Most of them are within the terms of land not in the green belt, but surrounding by the land beyond the green belt. Where local reaction by local residents has been made, the council has not taken an approach that where it is sustainable to build houses, this should be permitted. Now, can I just remind you, sir, that when an application is refused, it can go to appeal. And therefore, there's a further interpretation that comes out in the process by an inspector. He looks at the local plan, he looks at the neighbourhood development plan, and he takes a view. So
it helps, Mr. Aspinall. I know that. I've done that myself.
Yes, and sometimes if the local plan isn't clear, he has to improvise. So the council could adopt, in my view, for all the category A villages, a negative approach as against a positive, sustainable approach. That's why, in my view, it isn't sound to have the category A villages so predetermined that they cannot build houses outside the village boundary. And there are a number of reasons for that. I mentioned already earlier on the Section 106, the infrastructure levy, the increased amenities can enhance the quality of life for both new and existing residents. This does not say that if you give that flexibility in all category A villages, where it's quite possible that instead of 250 houses being built in one particular place, there will be developments of 30, 40, 50 houses spread about, which would gel into the life of the village much more effectively than building a great big estate on greenbelt land. The category A villages will stagnate. They will be villages that don't have any development because this local plan interpretation on a bureaucratic process of wording that I've heard this morning is that we will end up with certain villages that are designated, in the words of the council so far, which they want to change the wording, growth villages. That is unfair. On part B, again, it's not justified. Section 106 funding should be available to all villages, not just the villages for growth. And the villages for growth aren't going to like the idea of great big developments pushed into their area. And once you push one in, you push two in, you push three in, and that then discriminates against them too. On C, there should be no predetermined approach to refusing planning applications within this local plan. We need to build houses. We need to have the arrangement of sustainability, achievability, now, not in the future, and of course the availability of land. And there is availability of land, but the council hasn't done anything about it. So in my view, it does not, by creating this new designation of villages for growth, or whatever you want to call it, does not make this local plan sound. It gives so much lack of interpretation in its wording that those that are interpreting it will bend over backwards to say no. And D, do the main modifications alter the level of new housing that may be delivered in each one of the 5 villages involved? Well, obviously you do, because those villages are going to have to accept large amount of numbers. Why? Because you haven't got a 5-year house land supply, and this is one way of trying to get it. And in my view, in the quality of life argument, the number of houses that are needed should be spread about the North Hertfordshire, giving that quality of life to everybody that's concerned. Residences are there, new residents are coming in, infrastructure money that will be gained from Section 106, amenities that will be gained for those villages from 106 too. So I don't think that the idea of creating at this stage, you didn't come forward with this at the beginning, it's suddenly arisen on the agenda. And that is not sound. We could have been discussing this 2 years ago, but we didn't. The council have just come forward with this idea, and it's not sound and it's not acceptable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Aspinall. Can I just check, because Mr. Aspinall, because what I'm going to do now is hear the last points from people. So this is sort of to give you a last chance, really, to say anything else that you wanted to say on any of the 4 questions that I've set out, because I won't come back, you see. So I want to make sure you have the chance now. Did you hear me, Mr. Aspinall?
No, I've finished on these 4 questions. Your questions are very clear, and I hope my answers have been very clear. It's sound. It's not sound.
No, absolutely. I just want you to be aware that I won't come back to you again, because I'm giving you the chance now, if you see what I mean.
Yes, that's fine. I'm glad not to be speaking anymore.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Aspinall. Right, I'm going to take my break now. I make it 10:43. I adjourn the hearing to resume at 11:15. Just so everyone's aware, please don't leave the meeting, but instead, if you could just make sure that your microphones and cameras are switched off, please.
Wilfred, can you hear me? Hi. I can't hear you. You got to unmute.
Yes.
Hi. Do you remember that? Do you remember that guy from the very, very first hearings? I think he was from the Home Builders House Building Federation, and he gave. Do you remember him? He gave a card to my colleague at the time. Well, not my colleague, my friend at the time, Councillor Diane Moles. But he only gave us one card, and she took it. Do you remember that guy? He was saying about building and the small builders and all of that.
Yeah, was he the guy that's been attending this latest session?
Hi, apologies to interrupt. Just a reminder, we are still live on YouTube.
Oh wow, okay.
It's just on a break at the moment.
Sorry about that. I thought we were not live. Okay. Well, yeah. Anyway, that guy.
Okay. No, I haven't got any details for him at all.
Oh, that's a shame. Anyway, never mind.
Perhaps we can have a chat later on.
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay. Have you got a mobile number?
I have. I'll send it to you.
What?
I won't tell you now because it's going to go on YouTube. And
text it to me. Text it to me. Okay. Yeah. Bye then. Bye.
Okay, it is now 11:15, and so I resume the hearing. Good. It appears that that the people are back. Okay, very good. Mr. Hawkins, you are up next. So if I can ask that you're just clear about which or all or whatever of my four questions that you're going to address. And again, as with Mr. Aspinall, this is sort of the last chance to tell me what you want to tell me on those four questions.
Thank you, Inspector. I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity once again to express ourselves in relation to the EIP. I have actually given all of the commentary that I would like to give on the matter of villages for growth or growth villages. And I was hoping that I could just quickly mention to Mr. Smith that I share the pain of Ms. Cottier in trying to access the examination library. There is ED 84 that my team have been trying to access for the last 2 weeks, which constantly comes up with access denied. ED 84 is ED 54 Matter 9 NHDC note on SCHLA chronology. And so if you could please ensure that that document is available in the public examination library, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Inspector, for all your help.
Thank you. Mr. Griffiths.
So point taken. Yes, I'll do all four if I may, and starting from the top, really saying that it's emerging now from our discussions, I think that these amendments are not necessary for the soundness of the plan. It's not just a matter of semantics. So I look forward to the amendments that may be coming from the council. SB2 really is a standalone policy. It expresses very clearly the spatial strategy of the district council, which is being brought forward in this local plan, with the concentration of development in the towns, and then below that in the category A villages, etc. So it expresses very clearly the distribution of development proposed in the plan. And the housing numbers then go in SP8. And there's no harm in saying, if the council believes it, there's no harm in saying, well, in certain of those villages in SP8, we are allocating this number of dwellings for this particular village. And I would not want that policy, therefore, spilling over into the review sequence of the plan when that comes. Because I think the category A villages, I think a lot of sympathy with Mr. Aspinall there. The category A villages can then be looking for development according to their capacity, and that can then be delivered, I think, particularly with neighbourhood plans, which are coming forward gradually. You've heard from Mr. Hawkins about what's going on in Wymanley. You've heard that Nebworth are developing their own neighbourhood plan, and Barkway, etc. So these can actually start to deliver, I think, development which is actually according to the capacity of the village to bring it forward, and according, I think, to the organic growth of those villages, in accordance with, I think, the input from the local community. So I think that is an approach I've mentioned before that's been adopted by East Hertfordshire District Council in their local plan. They are strong on neighbourhood plans and their role in bringing forward development in the local plan. So I think I would commend that approach. I think in response perhaps to the final point, it may not alter directly the numbers of dwellings in those villages, but I think it's this perception of growth. You've heard from Mr. Watts already about the speculation from developers, the planning applications that are coming forward, for instance, in Codicot. But so I think my concern there is that the categorization of these villages is going to lead to pressures on the green belt, and we've said quite a lot of this about this before. And certainly in terms of the villages within the green belt, Nebworth, we've heard about before in some detail, but certainly I would be concerned about the capacity of Nebworth to take any more development in terms of the infrastructure that there is there already. Going to Nebworth at any time now during the day, you will see that the B197 throughout the village is absolutely jam-packed to capacity. We've heard that perhaps more schooling may become available. That may or may not happen, but I would be concerned about more development being attracted to Nebworth. It just can't take it in terms of
you know what I'm going to say, I think, Mr. Griffiths. You know what I'm going to say, and that is not to focus on specific settlements.
Okay. Well, you've got my statement. It does refer to Nebworth. It refers to Wymanley, to Collicott and Ickleford. So if it's all there in that statement, so I think what I would commend, I've already commended this early review, and I think what is needed here is a radical new strategy for this next round. A strategy which looks again perhaps at the settlement hierarchy, but based on sound evidence. I think what you've heard already this morning is that there is no detailed evidence for the main modification 010. And I think that strategy obviously then will look at the relationship between North Hertfordshire and East Hertfordshire, Stevenage, but also I think the relationship between North Hertfordshire and the areas over the border, particularly this relationship between Hitchin, Letchworth, Baldock and Olsey, Stopfield and the area beyond. I think that's going to be particularly important for the next round. There is certainly a lack of strategy, but I would certainly, in conclusion, I would say, please leave it alone for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, right, okay. Sorry, people's names have just jumped around a little bit. I have Ms. Cottier next. So, yeah, the same point to you, Ms. Cottier. If you can just be clear which of my 4 questions, or indeed, you know, whatever combination of my 4 questions you're addressing, just so that I'm absolutely sure about that. And as well, if you can make sure that you tell me everything that you want to tell me this time, because I'm not going to come back.
Okay. Do you want me to tell you what exactly? I think I want to pick up on the point about organic growth. So the idea of the villages for growth, and the idea of something growing and at what speed it grows and at what size, proportionate to the rest it grows at. So I think this is actually affecting all of the questions, and it was something that has it occurred to me back in week 1 of the hearing sessions in 2017, but only now do I really see how it fits into everything we're talking about. So when something grows in nature, it grows in increments, in stages. Okay, so it doesn't start at, say, a measurement of 100 and then leap to 1,000 all in one go. It grows in staged proportions, and that's how nature grows. And evidence for this can be found in every single thing that you look at in nature, be it a shell, where the whirl of a shell is very small and then it goes out in a spiral, mathematically calculable. It's called the Fibonacci number sequence and the Fibonacci proportion. And it's used in design. But it's not only used in visual design, it's used in mathematics as well. So it has an application in how something is visually spaced, as well as how it can be numerically calculated. And nothing in nature is exempt from this principle, in fact. And they have found it operating in the stock markets. They have found it operating in the proportions of the human body, such as the proportion from your eyes to your chin will be, say, 1 unit, and then from here to here will be 0.618. So the Fibonacci proportion is 1 to a ratio of 6.8. So it's 1.618. That's the Fibonacci ratio. And what that means is that for something to be aesthetically pleasing and in harmony with natural growth, if you have, say, apply it to a village, for example. Okay, so we have a village of 100 houses. Fibonacci principle of growth on that ratio would be 61 houses, is a balanced proportion in relation to the original size. And great artists such as Leonardo da Vinci have used it in their paintings. When a painter gets a canvas, they draw a line across the canvas to represent the horizon line. And the largest part of the canvas represents 1, and then proportionate to that, 0.618 is the size of the remaining section. Okay, and this is not a tangent, it's the central core of balanced growth. So if we have a village and it's 100 houses, you could say, right, let's develop by a proportion of 61 to that basic number of 100. That's unlikely to create too much distress, not only because of the size, but because it's in harmony with how things do naturally grow. So I'll give you an example that is nearish but far from here. Offley Village is a very tiny village, but it had houses built, about 60, I think, thereabouts.
Forgive me, Ms. Cossey. Yeah, I don't want to focus on particular villages, not
no,
least.
Okay, I'll just say a village I know, but you don't need to know the name, okay?
Thank you.
A village I know, a village I visit sometimes, but I don't live in it, and it wouldn't, if you put a housing estate on it, I would be sad, but it wouldn't personally affect me, okay? So it's not sort of like trying to get my own little argument in here. It's actually like an actual valid example that I think is relevant. So this village had some new houses put in it, and they were like the town houses. I think they even had 3 stories, because that's what they're trying to do now. They're trying to build upwards. But it fits in with the overall village. And they didn't really need too much extra infrastructure to accommodate this quantity of housing. And we've driven past it many times, and we've commented on, actually, those houses are not bad. You know, they're actually quite nice. They fit in with the overall keeping of the village. And I think the villagers didn't mind that they had they didn't object. Nobody, maybe there were a few grumbles perhaps, but I don't think anything of this scale. So that happened because it was in proportion. So this is something that seems to have not really registered, that there is this principle of proportion that runs throughout nature, and that growth that's harmonious and healthy is staged in increments that actually can be mathematically measured. And this and ignoring this principle is going against an aesthetic that is key to human beings, because we know when to recognize if something's ugly, or if something is, we instinctually know when we look at something that's ugly, you know. And usually it's ugly. Why is it ugly? Usually it's ugly because it inverts the Fibonacci principle, the harmony of, and they've even done studies on people's faces. So the closer you are to that Fibonacci proportion, the more physically attractive somebody is. And they've done this, they've even taken this outside of individual nationalities, and it seems to be a universally recognizable principle. So check it out, Fibonacci numbers, how do they apply to growth and proportions? And if we're talking about villages for growth, as to whether removing the word or not, I would put an insert, I'd say villages for Fibonacci growth, because that would automatically mean that it grows in proportion to what's already originally there. I know it's a bit out there, it's a bit like, what is she talking about? But look out, there's a lot of work that's been done on this, and it does relate to design, and design does relate to architecture and planning and space. And it also relates to how people respond to what's around them. If they're surrounded by beautiful things, if they're surrounded by harmony, crime diminishes, people are happier, they feel more well, and everything runs better, and they're more creative. Stick people in a concrete jungle, it runs contrary to the human spirit. The human soul wants to be surrounded by beauty, not ugliness. And that beauty has to incorporate within it that proportion, as all great artists over the centuries instinctively knew, which was why they became great artists and produced works of art that are still in our museums today and fetch a very high price. So, you know, there's something to this.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hutchinson. And similarly, if you could be clear for me which of my questions you're addressing, and just to let you know, this is the last bite of this particular cherry.
Thank you, sir. Specifically, our concerns were relating to D, but I think also concerns also in terms of B. So I think in terms of the questions that you've said, if the policy has been adjusted purely to identify the numbers that are now being allocated, I think that could have been dealt with in category A with a form of wording that would have simply said that 5 villages have had these allocations, because then it would have left the rest of development, the windfall development or any development that comes along, it would still meet the category that's defined by category A villages, so general development at that level. As soon as you take the villages out and put in another hierarchy, which is what we're doing here, it places them above the level of development that you would be expecting in a category A village. Now, it's not just in relation to the allocations that are being proposed, it's generally, as I said, in the future, and I've made that point about the future issues. So in terms of when anybody looks at this plan in the future and they see a hierarchy and you apply the sequential approach, which is the way it's supposed to work, the majority of development should go in the bigger settlements of the towns, and then you look at each stage in the hierarchy down. So a higher level of development to what you would expect in category A would naturally be assumed for the 5 villages. So that is my concern, one, about placing those villages within another separate tier and how it's going to be interpreted in the future. So I don't think that there is I would have thought there is a form of wording that could be quite easily accommodated to keep the villages within category A, quite accept that the plan proposes specific allocations. It can refer to those specific allocations if necessary, but that by placing them in a hierarchy, we are looking at something that is totally different to what was originally intended. I don't think I need to say much more. I think I've already said what my concerns were earlier on, and I don't intend to repeat that, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ball, yeah, again, if you could be clear about which of the 4 questions you're addressing, and yes, but both the first contribution and the last one.
Thank you, sir. I mean, in the first instance, I will be guided by you. You've read our statement, and we have no objection to the main modification. I was just a little conscious that the debate's been one-sided, and whether it would be of interest to you to hear the other side, or if you've got our statement and you're happy with what's been said within that.
Well, I have your statement and I've read it.
Okay.
And I understand it.
Okay.
I put it this way, I haven't put to one side any specific questions for you.
Okay. In which case, I'll move on then. It was only just an observation. There's been reference to infrastructure and a concern about infrastructure delivery. I just make the observation that the plan is supported by an infrastructure delivery plan, which has a schedule that contains timing points for when key infrastructure will be delivered. There's also a policy within the plan SP7, which I'm sure you're aware, which details certain criteria for the delivery of infrastructure. That was just my observation, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Mr. Stafford, the same to you in terms of, if you could be clear which of the questions you are talking on, again, first and last contribution.
Yep. That's fine. And thank you, sir. And similar to Mr. Ball, really, you've obviously got our written statement which does support this modification. But I do think there's a few comments I'd just like to make in very brief summary in order to reinforce that to a degree, but pick up on some of the points that have been made on the other side of the argument. So just some very brief comments, touching briefly on your A, B, and C, but obviously from the opposite angle in highlighting why we believe it's necessary or justified. So essentially agreeing with the intention and suggestion that the modifications to SB2 will assist with clarity in implementing the other houses relating to housing delivery within the plan. We would certainly contend that clarity is important in the interest of delivery of housing in North Herts. Arguments relating to delivery having clearly already been well rehearsed, and I don't wish to revisit that now. It reflects where allocations and commitments are proposed, hence the proposed inclusion of the indicative numbers per location. And as I understand it, the policy is quite deliberately not setting a minimum or a maximum, allowing for the ability for detailed site assessments as allocations come forward to ensure that applications are making the most effective use of land available. As should always really be the case as schemes move through the planning process from allocation into the development management process. So there will still be settlement boundaries, and while some of the sites for development to be released are obviously to be released from the Greenbelt will still exist adjacent to many of the settlements. Just very quickly before concluding, on the infrastructure delivery and growth point, there are specific village policies which clearly take this into account, including a degree of phasing. Though alongside this, there must be the recognition, I think, whilst making slightly different points to Mr. Aspinall, there was the relevant point raised there that the requirement for housing to unlock specific infrastructure as sites come forward. What I believe you're trying to achieve, sir, is a sound policy to support delivery. Any further changes or additions to wording would need to be very carefully considered in order to avoid barriers to that delivery, or that may in fact introduce ambiguity, which I sense from all the discussions this morning is the very thing that everybody on both sides of the development argument want to avoid. Not just because of the potential uncertainty, but also in respect to the impact it would have on delivering housing in North Herts, which we must come back to as the key thing here. So the suggestion of a radical new strategy at this advanced stage would clearly be counterproductive and should definitely be avoided. So very quickly in conclusion, on the basis that the remainder of the plan and its housing policies are found sound, SP2 as proposed amended via this modification is, in our view, an appropriate, sensible, helpful and sound policy to facilitate the delivery of much needed housing and its supporting infrastructure. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Anything else from anyone else who hasn't used their last chance? Okay, in which case, fine. Then I will next then move to the council and presumably Mr. Smith to hear the council's reply and comments on what we've heard this morning before closing for the day. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I think it's just first worth going back to the points you outlined at the start of the session, sir, and just reiterating kind of why we're here for matter 26. As you correctly identified, it was at the very original hearing on the settlement hierarchy that you identified that in your mind the breadth of category A villages as proposed in the plan was too great and asked us to split that out in an appropriate fashion. As has been said, the amendment doesn't affect the distribution of housing, it doesn't allocate further sites, it doesn't lead in our minds to a more or less permissive approach either in or adjoining the villages. We've taken on board the point about the phrase growth villages, villages for growth, or variations on that. We can soften the wording on that while making the same point about the hierarchy. to pick up on some of the detailed points made, and I think Mr. Ball perhaps just made these first couple of points for me just now. First of all, obviously, yes, the plan needs to be read as a whole. Within SP2 as amended, there is a reference for these 5 villages that the housing will be delivered along with supporting infrastructure and facilities. As Mr. Ball identified, policy SP7B has a very clear clause that requires infrastructure to be delivered alongside housing and operational when necessary, and where appropriate, individual sites have criteria requiring the delivery of or linking them to the delivery of specific items. And Codicot is an example of that, but I won't get into settlement specifics. Again, as identified, there is an infrastructure delivery plan supporting the examination, which you've clearly examined. That's not a static document, and once this process is finished, that will be continued to be updated alongside the plan as it's implemented as we go. Whether that presents information by settlement, by topic, by theme, I think is, again, just something we can take on board from the conversation here, that clearly the way we present that's quite important in setting out clear expectations as to what will happen. In terms of neighbourhood planning, that activity is supported by the council. We do provide officer support and guidance to parishes and other groups going through that process. Firstly, the point to make there, obviously, that doesn't release us from our wider planning duties, the need to prepare this plan, comply with national policy. And for those neighbourhood plans that have come forward in advance of this examination, it's been quite clear that the emerging plan is something that needs to be taken into account, and that was particularly the case at Wymondley, where the examiner was very clear that the neighbourhood plan shouldn't frustrate the implementation of whatever comes out of this process. Yes, the strategic policies for the purposes of that neighbourhood plan examination were those in the district plan, but that was a plan that set out housing requirements to 2001. So I think there's an appreciation on all sides that, you know, that was something that would be reviewed through this process, and neighbourhood plans will fit into that going forward. In terms of the category A villages, or the remaining category A villages, a point we made at the original sessions, picking up on the points made by Mr. Aspinall, is clearly there's no point in having a hierarchy if you also have a policy that says sort of ignore it and do what you want around the edges. The whole point of the hierarchy policy is to set out how development needs are going to be met. And a number of the villages that remain in category A have allocations for development. 11 of the 18 that remain, I think, have allocations. 2 have had relatively large developments that were included at earlier stages of the plan preparation but have since been implemented. So the idea that those villages will be sort of shut down in terms of growth is just wrong. And finally, just to address the point raised on examination documents, I know you said it was a conversation to be had offline, but bearing in mind this is live streamed, we'd just like to correct the record that all of the council's homework is available on the website under EDs 137 to 158, and there's a clear heading there that says they're North Hertfordshire's final responses to the actions arising from the hearing sessions.
My apologies, Mr. Smith, I didn't, no, you see. I didn't catch the number.
It was ED 137, ED 158. And there's a little subheading above that, which says NHDC final responses to inspectors' actions arising out of the hearing sessions. So they are all there. Take the point about ED 84 raised by Mr. Hawkins, which I've asked to be fixed already, but just to note that document is also available within ED 145, which was our Matter 9 homework. So notwithstanding the fault with ED 84, that document does remain publicly available. And just to conclude by reiterating that, subject to the slight amendment of the wording that's been discussed this morning, we're content that obviously, yes, the amendments to SP2 are required for effectiveness, as directed and requested by yourself, sir, at the original hearings. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's just one thing I wanted to check with you, Mr. Smith, and that was that the figures in SP2 are right, and this was a point that Mr. Watts made, that various sources of supply, and he referred to, I think, planning applications, are going beyond the figures given in the SP2 amendment.
There's a footnote in the main modification which says the figures shown in this policy are the total of planned, permitted and completed development for the period 2011 to 2031. Obviously that was correct as at the time of the main modifications. I think we've got a mental note already that, obviously subject to your findings on all the other issues, there will need to be a kind of final refinement of SP2 to make sure the figures, the percentages, the distribution are all correct. Because plainly, if you determine that we should go down a different path, then we would need to reflect that in the policy. So the figures were correct as far as we're concerned at the point of the main mods, but we do appreciate there'll be a final update on those to bring it in line with the latest information we've provided on housing supply.
Okay. Okay, fine. Ms. Cotier, you've got your hand up. I take it that that's on the question of access to documents, is it? Because I'm not going to come back for any further points.
It's to ask Nigel Smith, if possible, could he go to 18.03.14, table of actions, weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and in all of the boxes that are blank next to the inspector's actions, enter the data for the ED, whatever the document is, and the date that the item was completed, because some of the columns are showing dates completed and a reference in the examination library, and then many are not. And he as he says they've all been completed, I would these actions and these documents that have been provided, there are so many things that I really can't find. I don't think that they have been completed, but I could be wrong. So I don't think I'm wrong on certain things, however. But I haven't given you the exact things because they don't relate to this session. But I do need them, and I actually needed some of them for tomorrow, because we've got some other things to answer. We've been given some new modifications that were put in yesterday, and so for the rest of the day I've got to prepare for tomorrow, and I've only got 24 hours to do it. And this is new information that has only just been put into the library. It doesn't give us much time, because I was already busy last night preparing for this one. And so how can I prepare if I can't lay my hands on the relevant information? And if it isn't there, then I need to know, because otherwise I'll be looking for something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, okay. I understand the point. Yeah, if as I suggested before, if you could look at that offline and make sure that the documents that should be there are there.
Certainly.
Thank you. Okay then. Very good, which by my reckoning completes our discussion for this morning. And so I will now adjourn and make it 11:51. I adjourn the hearing then to resume tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you. And if I could just ask everyone this time to click on leave the meeting. Thank you all very much for your contributions.